Came to Eastern University in 2010 to direct the graduate program in nonprofit management, where we have students in graduate programs who are learning how to put together and manage and run in various divisions of nonprofit management, both particularly in the US for domestic programs and some internationally. So I teach core courses in our program in marketing, philanthropy, and issues. So one of the downsides of my official role is I don't get to teach my field. So when they asked if I could come to a workshop, I said, hey, can I do urban soc? That's where my doctoral work is, my professional training, after I went to seminary. And at the New School for Social Research in New York, which you'll know them if you watch TV for Project Runway and Parsons School of Design. But beyond that, it's one of the activist schools in the world, where I was pleased to be able to do my doctoral work amongst all sorts of global activists who come to New York in what's called the anti-Ivy of the Ivies. So we're thrilled about that. So you're going to get some of the things you can look up yourself. You'll find out what the New School is all about and its deep history of being the location for urban activists to come through New York, get passage, and then go back to their home country. So we have colleagues of mine who are on death row in certain places, challenging the state and politics and all that. So we'll get to that. Well, my work was in urban sociology, particularly in consumerism and in culture. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you an overview of a lot of models that are for urban sociology. Now we're going to take two tacks to this. How many of you are working in North American or Western-based cities? Okay, how many of you are working internationally or international cities? So most of you are North American, some ways. Okay. The models work in both environments, but what I thought I'd do at the back end of this, knowing that I understood there would be a group of North Americans, is take a shot at showing you some of the emerging trends in North America in particular, after we've gone through some basic theories about sociology that are out there. Now this is going to be fast, a lot of material, but these are the core ones. You'll get back to your own reading about this, and it'll give you a real sense of what we are studying in our field. Before we do anything else, let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this great group of people, and God, as we dive into where your heart is in the city, Lord, help us today to understand it in fresh, new, and exciting ways, and how you can access the city with us. Lord, be with us today, guide our minds and our time. Amen. Amen. Would someone read this for me, please?
The largest migration of people in history is taking place with people moving from rural areas to urban areas. In the coming year, 439 million more will move from the cities. There are now more people living in cities than in rural areas. In North America, over 90% of the population lives within the influence of an urban area.
Now, the big cities in North America and the world get all the press. I live in New York City. I get it, all right? But when we say urban, how do we define urban? It's within the influence of the structures of urban life. So schooling, industry, culture, poverty, wealth, culture. And what we've seen globally is a massive shift that started, at first in the industrial age in the 1700s, but has picked up massive speed from about 1980 onwards. As the economy globalizes, so it urbanizes. There's a whole thing we can talk about at another time about supply chaining and how supply chaining is creating this economy that is forcing people to cities. But it's no more relevant than this. In 2002, I had the privilege to go to Manila and work in the barangay, or the slum, and do an urban study there. And meeting folks who had been pushed off of the tenement farms in the northern islands of Manila. Why? Because the Dole Corporation had created a relationship with American industry for canning of pineapples and processing of pineapples. And so the Philippine government, with its strong connections to the American government, was easily able to do this. And thus, the farmers who had been living on this land that nobody had ever really claimed, they just kind of were tenants there, all of a sudden it was determined to be crown land or owned by the state. And now the machines came in to start to do the work, to produce much more pineapple, much more income, and a fast-rising middle class in Manila itself. Meanwhile, the farmers migrated down into Manila, living in the slums and eating off the remains that were left in the garbage. So it was an interesting vignette in a city of how you had this confluence of people moving to cities with push-pull factors, some of them because we created deals with the global economy, which allowed us to have office jobs in Manila. Meanwhile, those who lost their jobs are now there begging for whatever they could get to. So these push-pull factors, illustrated in Manila, are all over the world. If we were to take a quick journey in the revolution of urbanization, urbanization is the process of people moving together to civilize together. It really would have begun about 8000 BCE, where we see the emergence of the first city-states in the Mesopotamian Valley or at the head of the Persian Gulf. We also think that there were others in China and others in parts of India, or modern-day India, that were never recorded. But we certainly have records of the old Akkadian and Sumerian city-states where people would gather together. So that first began then. Around 1750 started industrialization, first in Europe, and as it worked itself across the world, and lasted for 2 centuries as cities became manufacturing places for the world's resources. So you would travel the world to find raw resources, bring them back to your cities, manufacture them, and sell them. The third revolution is now under the way. And this is the result of poor nations who are entering the high growth stage 2 of industrialization, which I just illustrated with Manila, and also the cities now gathering together all the types of opportunities that they offer, such as education, healthcare. Where's the global NGO going to drop their stuff? Some of it goes to rural areas, but much of it will find itself into rural, urban areas or the outlying areas within the influence of the urban area. Politics, economics, business, all runs in our cities. So there's no quick fix for this agenda, and I do not certainly have time in this or even in a whole grad program to fully unpack for you the influence of globalization and the global economy on the shifting urbanization. But we do know this: people are moving to cities if they're not already there. What's the process then of the urbanization of the world? It's moved from an agrarian society to an urban society. We all began as farmers, hunters, gatherers. Then we moved to become people who live together to support one another in what's called a civil society, where we get the idea of civilization. And the word civilization, from the Latin civitas, coming together, is where we get this concept of an urban society. People then living as citizens or living in a same location. They've moved from being wanderers and Bedouins to certain specific locations. Yes, some of those towns would move, but the idea of civilizing is the civitas of people coming together for various rationales to be together. From urban, Latin urbs, we get the term urban. Literally, buildings and structures. So where you have civitas, you get urbs. So you have people, and they got to live somewhere. You have people, they got to work somewhere. So as they're living as citizens, they live in buildings and structures and streets and infrastructures that support this. So people then, if we're to define urbanization, living in structures and buildings together. So as they're living in structures and buildings together, everybody, what does it do? Human culture emerges. And what we said before, so more people now living in cities than rural areas. We'll go quickly over if you want to look at these on your own. So here's some other kind of ways that urbanization is talked about. So you have the idea of urbanization where the expansion of a city, urban growth, population rate grows, roads and buildings rise, industry increases is another way that urban growth is talked about. Urban transition, the different ways people shift within an urban area. Urbanism, the social and psychological effects with people on urbanization. So they all have different shades of what they talk about with how people live in cities. All right, now, if you're going to be a good minister in your neighborhoods, and I know this not only from study, but I certainly knew this from riding the buses, you've got to learn how to view the city from both a micro and a macro perspective. You have to learn to look at it very close and from a distance. There's a savvy difference between the two. I've taught with my grad students about urban planning and the difference, different between the street planner that works street-based community development compared to the rational planner, as Sandra calls them, who works in an office downtown at the city center and plans for everybody else how the city is going to be managed. So a savvy person will learn both the micro and the macro. Not a simple posture to be in, but what does it look like? Well, you're maybe in the Philadelphia subway. There's two ways to look at it. Macro would be a broad perspective. You would look at routes, connections, stations, trains, budgets, union contracts, employees, on-time success rates. So a good, savvy person who's working in education would understand what are the macro effects of budget planning for our city and our region. What's the NGO effect in our region on support services? Why is there systems that's not providing education effectively from a macro level? Micro is the small. What does a person do on the train? How do people interact with one another? The homeless fundraisers for the individual people that come on the train and shake their little cup and put on their little act. Now, I know I was going to talk here today. I always like to keep things really fresh. So last night, as I was going to teach a course at City University of New York, at CUNY, Brooklyn, I was riding the G train downtown, and so I sat in my chair. I said, "Okay, I got to get my micro on," and knowing I'm going to Urban Prom, I said, "I love kids that there's nothing like New York City kids who at 10 years of age just jump on the subway and they're already taking control of the subway and they know totally where they're going." And here was this micro of kids who get on the train, talk and enjoying each other, having their books and stuff, and then they go down the train to Nostrand and then to Hoyt Schermerhorn, get off the train and change the train to the next place. I mean, I'm thinking, in what places would you not even dare to drop your kids on the subway and just let them go to school? And I dawned on me and said, well, I did the same thing with my kids. Because we understood this micro that takes place in the system, that the system protects itself. But indeed, there are about another 20, 30, or 40 policemen watching those kids in each subway car. Indeed, I felt policing to take care of these kids because they were great kids. So you have this micro that is important for you to learn how to meander and observe and live within. So the city structures then have gone from agricultural marketing centers and religious centers. The earliest city-states were built on markets where you would bring your products to the town and it was places of worship. Now this is where you would, if you look at some of the ancient towns, they would build ziggurats or little towers in the middle of the town, and you climb up to the top of the tower, and whoever was the king or the demigod or whoever it was that would go up to the top of the tower, usually because he'd won a war or he'd taken care of the people, would then pray to the gods that good things would come upon us. So you go to the city with your products, your good things, also then believing that the city in some way redeems your life. So there's a deep, deep spiritual history about the redemption of the city, of its peoples. Pre-industrial cities, this would be pictured all the way from the Assyrian era to the medieval ages, through the Greek times, in particular the Greco-Roman Empire reflected this, as they became centers of political, cultural, and military power. So the city provides a place of protection. Some of you who've done your Old Testament study may have come across the cities of refuge. And we see this pictured here, where cities of refuge were built as a place I could escape to. That there was a place of refuge. It was interesting, I was sharing with one of my colleagues, Mike Herman, who runs Compton United. Think about this, Compton United Soccer in LA. Where his dream was to have kids play in Kelly Park. So if you understand anything about Compton and Kelly Park, on one side was the Latin Kings, on the other sides are variations of the black gangs shooting across Kelly Park. And he said, if there's a way I can put kids in Kelly Park, they won't shoot, because there's always refuge for kids. And he knew in gang culture, grandma's house is always safe. So if you went to jail, even as a gang member, don't you dare ever have shot at a kid, and don't you ever dare have shot at grandma. Because we all have to have somewhere to go. And over a period of time, Compton United, with its logoing, now sponsored by Chivas USA and the LA Galaxy and stuff, it's a great little thing they're doing, with team colors that are yellow and black. Wearing uniforms that represent Hispanic and black. Both players, the black guy saying, we're better athletes than you because they play ball, right? And these Latin kids can't play nothing. Well, Latin kids play soccer, but they're not as athletic. So now he's put both of them together in Kelly Park with the kids. And all of a sudden the shooting has stopped. Now they have picnics, they have film nights in Kelly Park, and the families come out. And so you have in Kelly Park the city of refuge. Places in cities I can go where I find freedom from the oppression that I face. The industrial cities, and of course, manufacturing, where we migrated for jobs. And then a new term that came out, emerging in the 1990s, 2000, but has now picked up massive speed. Saskia Sassen's very important book. If you're really an urbanist, you've got to read this book. It's heavy going and it's thick. The book is called Global Cities. And what she articulates is there's really only 3 global cities in the world that could be dictated as global cities. London, New York, and Tokyo. Now why do you suppose that would be? And she would articulate it as only those 3 cities are the only true global cities, where they're not tied to a nation state or anything. They function within the world.
The economies.
Economies, and specifically how?
Like global trade. That's what I think of.
So many other cities do global trade.
But those are the centers. Like,
Stock
that's
exchange.
what I'm thinking of.
Stock exchange. So think about this. Wall Street opens up, Nikkei in Tokyo opens up the day and predicts what's going to end up at Wall Street. And so Tokyo makes the early decisions, why you can see the Asian economies are foreshadowing what the rest of the world is doing, why Asia has such significance now. And the Nikkei is the first read. Then it rolls around midday to Fleet Street in London, that's picking up and interpreting what's happened over in Asia. Finally, it lands on Wall Street to make the decision for everybody. And Friedman talks about this in how what it's created is an electronic herd of traders. And what this electronic herd does is they will read this trend and send their money to companies that make the trade good. Just like the cows in the pasture go to where the grass is the greenest and they feed the best, so the electronic herd looks for places in the world that are the best investment spots. So this has tremendous implications on the globe, because if your politics, your military areas, your economy is not pleasing the electronic herd, they'll pull their funds and move, which some have said has created this new economy between high-scale, top-level NGOs, somehow reflected in the UN subsidiaries to a degree. And I got many of them who live in the apartments where we live. They take the ferry across the boat, across the East River. So they're global executives in the NGOs, business people who are executives, and political leaders. Which, if any of you have done any sociology, you'll have heard of C. Wright Mill's power elite, which was military leaders, business leaders, and political leaders all together, and they moved from these positions to kind of control the overall environment. What you have here, you have a similar scenario that affects exactly what happens in your city. So someone who's savvy will watch this, but not be driven by how the markets go up and down. But what's interesting about this is it has, as you'll see in a little bit, created massively growing inequality between the rich and the poor. And it's starting to gut out the middle class, because the goal is, if it's better profit made by having suppressed wages in this region, where there's these manufacturing plants, say in Phnom Penh, that there's a better place for us to do our t-shirts. We'll send our factory there. Or we'll send it to Honduras and move it there. Or we'll send it, as in the case I saw, to Manila, because it's better for our funds. So the global cities set up this effect that hits your local cities, where rural people migrate from rural economies to the cities to find these jobs, homes, healthcare, etc., etc., etc. So this is the overall evolution of city structures. Any questions or comments so far? Am I losing you? You're still with me?
Is Tokyo still, have they lost their relevance a little bit with the emergence of China of the world economy?
No.
Still.
Still market where Chinese money goes. Some have said Chinese money is the most fluid money in the world, so it'll go to wherever the market is, because it does not have a nation state that it builds. It's very, very fluid. That's why you'll see in, this is a very cute insight. I'm from Vancouver, so we understand the Hong Kong thing, but people from Hong Kong don't believe they're Chinese in the same way that Chinese believe they're Chinese. And everybody who's lived in Vancouver, you'll appreciate this. So right now there's the tallest residential building being built in New York City. Next time you go by, you'll see it. It's taller than the Empire State Building. And there's a second one going up, and it's all global money funding it. So the penthouse now has been sold for $95 million. But speaking of China, so this is not the world we live in, but apparently they've set up in one of the office buildings the actual, come in and look, this is what your apartment will look like. And a Chinese woman came in and bought one of the apartments, which are mega $1 million, for her 2-year-old daughter for when she's going to go to school in New York. And so their thought is that this apartment building is actually a bank, because people are dropping their global money into these apartments, but they'll maybe live there 2 weeks of the year. So there's this, and you'll see it right up there, right in New York City. I'm watching the thing going, I just don't like the fact the thing is getting taller than the Empire State. There's something really kind of about that, you know, New York investors say it's a global city. And there's another one now, the Nordstrom, ain't from Seattle. Nordstrom's will have their signature New York store. They're finally coming to New York on the new apartment building that's going to be on Central Park West, and will be taller than this one. They're 88 stories or something like that. So enjoy it next time you go outside. All right, let's go to a few models. All right, so how am I going to, in my city, knowing all this big stuff, these hopefully are helpful to you. Hunter's model argues that people live in 3 different realms. They live in the private realm of family, friends, the same people that they hang out with. They live in the parochial realm of community relationships, businesses, religious spaces that are the regular places they go. And he argues they live in the public realm, the streets, the sidewalks, government offices, the police station, these places everybody has to go to do some sort of business. So the concept here is people are moving within these spaces. So they move from their home, sometimes in a car. Some would say the car in suburbia is the home. People make different versions of what's my private space, or what's called privatopia, the utopia of my private world. This is privatopia. My friend's space is where only me and my friends go. To the park, the cafe, the school, the church, neighborhood community spaces. This is a parochial realm for many people, where they are right here in this neighborhood. And the public realm, the sidewalk, motor vehicle office, the subway, shared impersonal spaces. So people move between these elements. So a good urban savvy organization will understand the broad parts of the city and the macro for sure, but they're going to work hard here because people regularly frequent these. But if they don't have this, you can't have this. So this is the fusion here between good urban savvy provides housing and infrastructure for the privatopia. So I have a private space, right? I have a place I can live. Meanwhile, I can then be part of the infrastructure. So this, between community development and urban community development, lives in this world, but often having to touch this. Yes?
How does this look for somebody that's homeless? How about a family that's homeless?
So, a great question. I'll toss it back to you. You work in Vancouver's East Side. Is that piece of cardboard that I put down on that sidewalk regularly after 7 when the stores close, is that my home? Or am I homeless?
I think the way I look at it is, if you don't have like a physical edifice, like your home is where you lay your head and where you feel comfortable. Like if you're not feeling comfortable in that spot, it's not going to be your home. But if you do, and it's your routine, it's your regular, then yeah, it's your private space, it's your home, it's your safe place.
There's an interesting thing. We have groups come and do training in New York City for what's called, we used to call it, don't take this the wrong way, but those of you who work here and in your cities, you understand, call them zoo tours, right? People coming to look at the animals and feed our animals and then go back and talk to their friends because they're good pictures, right? So there's this kind of slang that we have in New York of the zoo tour. That says we like to be the zoo because we need visitors at the zoo. It's good for us. It's not like a bad thing. But we call it what it is. It's kind of a New York thing. So in answering this question, so if you go to Midtown, now, well, it's a different thing now, but if you're because it's become tourist mecca. But if you would have been there 5 years ago, before the 42nd Street Business Improvement District really decided, and Bloomberg and all decided to turn it into a Disneyfied space, you would have found people on these park benches. And they'd be there regularly all the time. So is this a home? Well, we're going to get you into the shelters. Well, they'd go to the shelter and they'd leave and they'd come back to the space. Because home was on the park bench. And because these are the same guys, these are the same people, so our homeless workers began to realize that in order to have the zoo tour people work with us, we'd have to teach them that where you actually have to be to give the sandwiches is somewhere down here. Instead of the paternalistic hand-me-down sandwich, which is most of the posture. And so if those of you who are down here, see, got a nice little community, right? Hang out. What are you doing? That's nice shoes. Yeah. Try it sometime. So this becomes a dilemma. How do you then work with those who are going to be on the streets? This becomes in New York City, certainly, one of the real questions with broken windows theory. Broken windows theory being that we have mass policing to get people off the streets so there isn't petty crime, because the presumption is when you're homeless, you're a petty crime. So I saw this played out. I come off the Queensboro Bridge, and it's at 62nd Street, comes off the bridge, and here I'm seeing the homeless guy. It'd be about 7 in the morning or whatever, so he's had a good night's sleep, and he's got everything in his shopping cart. This is the trailer. This is the house trailer right here. And up pulls a NYPD and a sanitation truck, right? This is a 62nd Street and 1st Ave, which is a uppity area. And then the sanitation guys get out, take his trailer, and put it in the back of the sanitation truck, vroom, off they go, and here's the homeless guy standing on the street. So they just came and demolished his house, in his worldview. So, his house is a parochial space to him. Might not be to people who live on 62nd Street, says we own this sidewalk. They view the sidewalk as a public space. They don't view it as parochial. Does that make sense? So I think for those of us who are savvy urban workers, we have to manage this, because the macro will say this sidewalk is public. The micro will say this guy has his little house trailer parked right there. You've got his bed right there. And if you want to condition him to go to that homeless shelter where he feels threatened, he doesn't have control, so be it. Oldenburg has a concept of third places. In a very important book called Great Good Place. Someone now read this, please.
I'll do it. The third place interrupts the regular cycle of urban life. It can become a place we separate ourselves from the regular mundane world of life. Church, gym, coffee shop, restaurant, sports club, bar, dance club, or beauty salon.
Think of yourself and consider yourself in your cycle on a daily basis. Or the regular person in a city, home to the job, to the home, to the job, to the home, to the job, to the home, to the job. That's the regular mechanical cycle. That's Weber's great bureaucracy of the city, the mechanical life of the city. It goes home to the job, to the home, to the job. But what do people really do? And this is where Oldenburg challenges us. He said, people go home to the job, to the home, to the job, to church, to home, to the job, to the job, to the cafe, to the Starbucks, to home, to the job, to the home, to the cafe, to the Starbucks, to the home, to the job. And yes, this morning, on the way to this job from New York, I'm a diner guy. And so what's this diner that's just up the road here? I went to this little diner, and the Penguin Diner. Good diner. That rocks. I got a diner. I'm going to go back there. Well, I can't eat that much, but there you go. I have my own little third place thing that I do. So a very fascinating thing about this. A wonderful pastor in New York City, Dr. A.R. Bernard, planted the Christian Cultural Center about well over almost 30 years ago. And it's now mushroomed into, they call it the Obama Generation Church. About 28,000 people go to Christian Cultural Center. But what's fascinating about the facility itself, he recognized that New York is a fast-moving place, and people will meet in restaurants if they're middle class, because they don't have enough space. I have a studio apartment, so yes, I'll invite you to my place, but you got to look at my stuff. So we also downsize our stuff. It's kind of, the simple life becomes the reality of the studio life. It's a whole other book I should write one day. But the third place becomes the place you land. And what they've done, they have the sanctuary in the middle, but the whole foyer going all the way around is this massive living room. With couches, they have a big fish tank that could have been off the Tank Show. They have a restaurant, and I think there's a Burger King built into it. They have the administration desk is like a hotel lobby thing with the velvet ropes and stuff. Because what they recognize, people in New York City, whether you're rich or poor, will come to this third place. And he uses third place theory in actually having it. And the church is open all the time. So they don't have all these massive security things, so you can come to it like it's your own living room. Now they're right adjacent to Canarsie Houses, which has about 28,000 people living in it. So there's people from Canarsie who come over and hang out in the church lobbies and sit on the couches and do whatever, go eat, and they might go to the church thing, but they might just leave. And now they have a prayer garden as part of their third place, a playground as part of their third place. So this gets to this. Urban promise is all over this. Whether they had understood it as a theory or not, but there's the theory. So your idea is to create interruption between this regular mechanical life that gives people a place where they say, I want to land. Now those of you from North America will understand this. How many are drink Starbucks? The great Pacific Northwest invention. Other than the Vancouver Canucks and Seattle Seahawks. But that's another story another day. Go Hawks! 1 year. But Starbucks used third place theory in their whole idea. Now think of when you go to Starbucks. There's never enough room for everybody to sit. But you can what? You can smell the coffee. You can hear the jazz. You can order a personalized cup with your name on it. Unless you're my friend Luann, her Facebook posting is, what's the latest way they've spelt my name on the cup? So she has this collection of different spellings of her Starbucks cup. So this idea of I have a place to land and a place to stop. So I speak at a conference in St. Louis, adjacent to Busch Stadium where the Cardinals play. And there's a Marriott hotel there. Down at the end of the hallway, the hotel has put on wonderful coffee. Only the way Marriott Hotel would do it. It's got the white linens, it's got the nice silver things, and you can get a cup, and you can even get a cup to go, and it smells great, and it's free. Free coffee. And I'm going there, and I walk past the lineup that circled around a big S of people on their phones, waiting in line for their Starbucks at the bistro counter in the lobby.
Wow.
I said, you can go get the free coffee over there, or you can send the rest to Missions or Urban Promise, or you can go spend $4 for their. It dawned on me, these are habitual third place people. Gotta have my Starbucks. Okay, you people who drink Starbucks, now you should feel guilty. So in urban culture then, the third place offers these types of things. This is where we find our music, our arts, our festivals, our food styles and our menus, our language, where we find people that we talk to are there. This is where religious practice takes place. So these environments are the third place environments. So it's highly important, if we're going to be effective in our ministry, that we think in all of these whole life terms. That it's not just about education, it's not just about some structure, but it becomes the location to be. In Vancouver, we recognize this with Christmas. We're working with a lot of First Nations and Southeast Asian children, and we recognized most of them had never really celebrated Christmas. It wasn't part of their culture because that's white man's culture. First Nations people, why? Because the white men oppressed us and destroyed our culture, so we don't celebrate. And the Southeast Asian, well, they come from a Buddhist background. We said we're going to break this tradition, and we put on a Christmas banquet with gifts, toys, festivals, and everything, under the thought that if we do this and invite the kids, they'll bring their brothers and sisters, aunt, uncle, you know how aunt, uncle goes, right? There's many aunts and uncles, and we're not sure which is a blood relation and which one is not. Really, their community. So we get these tables full of people. So out of the 200 kids or so that we bust in on this special event, well over 1,000 people would come, and it gained its tradition as the place to go for your Christmas dinner. So we'd have Buddhists, we'd have First Nations, we'd have all this kind of thing happening. So it was a way to celebrate the season. and give out gifts to kids and their families. So this becomes a magnet for us to be able to do this type of thing. All right, we finish at what time? 7 after, I heard?
We should have all worked 7. That's really exact.
I thought we were supposed to be out for
What's that?
15.
The rooming.
15?
I think it's at 12.
It was 15
All right, we'll go to 12:15.
No, 17.
All right. Yes, my wife teaches at CUNY City, in the CUNY system, and it is by the minute. That's what the union schools do. All right. This is an important structure. This will work wherever you work in the world. Louis Wirth's important theory came out of the Chicago school. It designs the city as a mosaic of social worlds. So the concept I want you to think about is a wall of tile with pictures on it. All right? I should have one on this PowerPoint, but I don't for whatever reason. So, you know, if you were to go to some location where they've done this mosaic, you'll have different colors of mosaics or of tiles, many tiles put together onto the same picture. The overall thing makes for a nice scene. As you get into the micro, you begin to realize each tile is independent of the other tile. Because what holds it together on the wall? The grout or mortar holds it together on the wall. So there's something that holds these tiles to the wall, so they don't fall off the wall, but because each tile is not actually connected to the other tile. They're adjacent to one another. Are you understanding this? So, illustrated here. They're next to each other. If you pull really far back and you can't any longer see the line between them, it's like a big picture. The closer you get, the fissures appear, right? The separations appear the closer you get to it. That's why urban workers are going to feel this, and the fissures and the separations. So that's the concept. So people live adjacent to one another, yet each have significantly different social identities and histories. Each tile is unique to itself. But along with that is that the neighborhoods then change and adapt as different groups migrate in and out of this neighborhood. So the mosaic, the overall picture, looks different in different generations. I guarantee you, Camden looked different 50 years ago and 100 years ago, 150 years ago. But it's shifted and changed due to various push-pull factors that have changed the mosaic. The structure, yes?
Is the concept of a melting pot a myth? Sociologists have abandoned?
No, it's not a myth. Wirth would argue that it is, but not, which you'll see in the concept of heterogeneity. The idea of melting pot, for those who don't know, is when you put everybody into the same pot, they diffuse into one another and they create a new culture. And I've taught on this in the New York context. You know the New York accent. Some of you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, you get it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You get it?
Yeah, I get it.
You better get it. If you don't get it, get out of here, all right? You know what I'm saying? You hear me?
I get what you're saying. All right.
All right, good. Get over it. Don't ask me again. I'm being overly dramatic. That's not the way it is. But those of you who are from the city, no, we're all very we're kind of
That's the outer boroughs, I think, at this point.
At one point, heart of Benson Hoist.
Yeah.
Heart of Benson Hoist in the 80s. So what is this, this New York accent? Well, it's a blend of Yiddish, which is Jews that migrated from Eastern Europe, Italians, and Irish, the Irish brogue. So that was layered over top of the proper English that had been in New York at the time, and gives it its unique characteristic, different than Boston, which is heavily influenced by the Irish in Boston. So this is, some would say, this is a melting, which it probably is, and the new one is called New Eureka. as a New York is radically, you heard this term?
That's what I am.
Oh, talk to us like a New Yorican.
I was born in New York, but my parents are Puerto Rican. So when I talked to somebody, and this, I said, like, what do you know? You don't know what a New Yorican is? They're like, no, what's that? And I was like, my parents are from Puerto Rico, but I was born in New York and I was raised there.
Yeah,
It's
so you're New Yorican,
yeah,
right?
New Yorican.
I'm feeling this. I understand you. I understand you, you know. Or as my good friend, Pastor Michael Carrion, Covenant Church client here in the Bronx. So same thing. So born and bred in New York, but a strong Latin background, particularly Puerto Rico, but they're now saying it's also Dominican. It's also, to some degree, the Jamaican community, though they're not Spanish rooted. So the New Yorican then is another melting pot. But tell me, does a New Yorican, does a New Yorican hang out in Williamsburg, Brooklyn?
I guess. I haven't been there in a long time, so.
Hasidic Jews and hipsters. So it's not New Yorican, the Bronx is. So no, in that sense, no, they don't melt. They melt, but they don't melt. So you have this concept then, so that's the one, the melting pot is like that. The salad bowl is, we're all in the salad and the salad tastes good, but it all has different flavors. And unless you have the flavors separating, it's, no, it's actually a term. So you have the melting pot, which is like a soup. So you put the ingredients in the soup and boil it over a period of time. It's a new flavor. The salad bowl has all its distinctions. Some would argue that Canada very much is a salad bowl. The US claims to be a melting pot. And New Yorican might be part of the melting pot. But what he says is the structure in the urban mosaic is based on three premises. 3 bricks, 3 structures. One of them permanence, the other heterogeneity, the other one density. You do not get an urban mosaic unless you have something there that is permanent. And the permanence is usually buildings, streets, structures that have always been there. Sometimes it's people who've lived in that neighborhood for generations. They do not move. But it has permanence. Then it has heterogeneity. Homo means one, hetero means many. So you have, or others, so it's never just one group. A mosaic does not happen when it's a homogeneous neighborhood. It has to have different colors of tiles, literally. All right? And it has density. So you have to put them together. It's not a mosaic if one tile is over in one part of the bathroom and the other one is over in the other part of the bathroom. Right? Your shower is going to get wrecked. You got to get the tiles where the bath is and put it all together. So the concept of mosaic of social worlds is where there's permanent structures, you bring different people together of different kinds, you will get the mosaic. Le Bon, though, in the 1880s, and I think this is a fascinating book, in studying sports crowds, argues that heterogeneity, you're putting people in a crowd, the book is called The Crowd, they will find their own kind. That this is where Le Bon would very much challenge the melting pot idea. People will hang out, as McGavran said, with people like themselves. It will breed the homogeneous unit principle. So the tile will never become a different color. It may be shaded with the people that are around it, but it remains its permanent structure. So it begins to look something like this, folks. So if there is generation A, the way the street and the neighborhood looks, and if the colors represent different specific cultures, we could say whatever, like the red here possibly could represent Polish immigrants that had moved in. The light ivory could perhaps represent Irish. You could have the magenta representing Jamaicans, and so on and so forth. This is what begins to take place over time. So generation A looks like this. Generation B, like this. Generation C, like that. Generation D, like that. And so if we're to cycle it back, sorry, I didn't do that very well. That's a crappy professor, don't pay him. Goes like this. All right, see the idea? So a good urban minister has a historical sense of where this neighborhood is from. And you understand its generations. You cannot fully understand it unless you have some sense of perspective of its different generations. So I challenge everyone to go back to your cities, your neighborhoods, wherever you are, begin to do some research and start to map out, actually map the city. This is called city mapping. Go look at the neighborhoods, who lives there, what are the stores, and map the thing out. I've challenged lots of urban workers that I've worked with to do this, to walk within 10 blocks of where we're doing the community development center and map it. And then go back to the city files or wherever you can find archives or talk to people who've been there or have known and find out where this has been and where it's come from. This is really important to help to understand. Any questions about Mosaic? This stuff you're missing? Since we were going to finish with the American city, let me go with this then. So the American city has had these phases of it. Colonial, Southern, Northern, and 1900s consumer cities. What we have now is the metropolis and megalopolis, which is large cities that socially and economically dominate an urban area. So, you know, I'll do Philly right now. You know, you talk to people, say, I'm from Philly. What does it mean to be from Philly? Does Philly mean you're from Norristown? Does Philly mean you're from Camden? I'm from Philly. Does that mean I'm from Chester? Does that mean I'm from, St. David, where Eastern is? I hear this kind of language. I'm from the main line. I'm from South Jersey. I'm from Bucks County. You're from Philly. The Philly metro area, about 5 million people. Get over it. Sorry to do that. You can't get out. No, I'm just saying this is the idea, so you can have a perspective that Philly is the city and everything else is not the city. Right? So it has a certain, and of course people from Philly, or even from, they're from Camden. That's not Philly, that's Jersey, that's across, right? It looks like New Yorkers go, well, that's Newark. It's not New York, it's Newark, right? You understand? I'm not from New York, I'm from New York, right? They'll do that, but hey, it's 18.5 million in the tri-state. It's a megalopolis. It all moves together. So what you have is another interesting phenomenon that's taken place in the current milieu is what we call megalopolis, with large cities connected by infrastructures, roads, and so on. So a good example of this is Dallas-Fort Worth. Any of you from Dallas-Fort Worth? Okay, where Cowboy Stadium is built is halfway between Fort Worth and Dallas. And everybody commutes in and between it. So it's a large area. San Francisco, well, it's the Bay Area. San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland. Some are arguing that the Northwest is now a megalopolis. Vancouver, Seattle, Portland. Is a megalopolis Boston, New York, Philly, DC? Some say yes, especially when Yacela goes all the way, that it's a megalopolis. And so you're thinking, when you're thinking Camden, you're thinking in the context of a megalopolis. The core principle of the way the American city is developed is the concentric zone theory, which says it moves out from a city center to its various rings. Edge cities exist on the edge of the ring, as Garreau puts it, and it is a description of suburban DC. And edge cities have their own little downtowns along the fringe. Camden would be an edge city of Philly. Some edge cities are far connected, some are actually part of it. Then there's satellite cities. Wilmington, Allentown, possibly Lancaster, that are within the framework and influence of the large city, but they're not in it. So we have satellite cities all connected by commuting and telecommuting routes, creating this kind of a framework of a metroplex. That everything has now its patterns. And I've seen people, in fact, when I lived in Nyack, New York, which was north of the city, people that never went to the city. My son Graydon is not birthed on going to the city. He's an NFL fan, so why don't you go to Radio City Music Hall for the draft? I said, I don't want to go to the city. You know, so his idea is just being in the ring. He doesn't go to the city. So it's a part of a metroplex. So what you have within this context is suburbanization. And what's fascinating about this is what we see as the rise, which I wanted to finish with today, because it relates specifically to here and to a lot of you, is the idea of inner city is shifting. We now have a new term called interburb. That's what some people are calling it. What we've seen in the post-recession particularly, but telecommuting has created this, is creating a few new phenomena. One of them are exurbs, which are people who never go to the city but telecommute, or they go in a little bit to the city. Then what happens is the cities themselves are being repopulated now by young professionals and empty nesters who are wanting to get back to the city and downsize, leaving houses not saleable in the inner suburbs. So the cost of living goes down and the poor migrate to the inner burb. Now Camden has a bit of a different history with its manufacturing background, I understand that. But I would think Pennsauken, is that how we say it?
Pennsauken.
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 Is it Pennsauken or Pennsauken?
Oh, depends on where you come from.
Pennsauken, your mouth in. You know, has some of these dynamics. And another fascinating part of this is some studies are now being done about when the poor migrate out because of cost of living, what takes place. I'll illustrate it with an article that was came out 2010 by a sociologist who was investigating this phenomenon in the suburbs of Chicago. As prices went up in south side's a whole, in Gary, Indiana, a whole nother different ball of wax. But she had migrated, I understand that, but she'd migrated out to the suburbs. What's fascinating is the journey of trying to find health care after midnight when the buses stopped running. Because she was doing, she had to move out there because she was doing childcare and stuff, and her kid got a cold, and she couldn't find any pharmacy open because it's people who have their personal pharmacists and stuff like this. So she'd migrated out to live in this area, but there's no social service there, which she'd gotten used to. So it creates an interesting desert of social services in these areas. Because there isn't the density of poor, because they're all fragmented in inner burbs. Yonkers, New York's a bit of a different thing, and Camden's a bit of a different thing. But generally, they'll migrate out. The government is not about to all of a sudden plant all sorts of social services there to attract more poor, because what? That brings down the tax base of the wealthy communities around it. So that's one interesting illustration. Another one is Brewster, New York. It's in Westchester County. And if you ever get up to New York, you can watch this. They've seen that particularly undocumented workers in global cities where you have a lot of wealthy people hire landscapers and childcare and home cleaners, pictured in Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dimed as that woman in Connecticut that we hire, and we hire the cheap help. So in global cities, we like these people. So Brewster, New York is just down the hills from the mansions that are up on the hillside. You'll take the little road and it'll wind down right into the valley where the little stream goes. And here's this mini neighborhood. Little downtown kind of area like you saw on Westfield Drive here. Is that right? And that's where the Hispanic community lives. And then they go up the hill and walk up the hill or ride their bikes up the hill to service the wealthy, then go back down into their little valley. Brewster, New York is all over this. There is no social services in Brewster, New York. So the only person who's going to do it there is if there's a Hispanic church that's planted there to provide those services. Then there is Newburgh, New York. Newburgh, New York is on the Hudson River, about 40 miles north of the city, and it's the Bed-Stuy, Camden of New York. You hear how New York has gotten so wealthy and the poor are no longer here? They got pushed up the river. So if you go to Newburgh, it's hell on earth. And my wife taught there, and it's its own sub-community. It's a satellite city that its only relationship to New York is that that's where the poverty went. So just because an area gentrifies out of Brooklyn or Bed-Stuy and the hipsters move in, doesn't mean that it did anything good for the poor. They just got driven upriver. And so Newburgh is now becoming its own inner burg. So this is what I challenge you and leave with you with, is where you are is in the new emerging trend, and it's only going to continue to grow. If you want any more of this other stuff, you've got my business card that I sent around. Just email me and I'd be happy to get it to you.
Thank you.
All right?